I'm beginning a brand new series of lessons that I've entitled, The Battle Belongs to the Lord. And today I'm going to talk about the battle to believe and the battle to belong, because those are both struggles that we have at times. To maintain our faith in the midst of problems or struggles, and to also have a sense that we fit, we belong, and that God has a perfect place for us. And within that place, we may not be perfect, but it fits us perfectly. And so we're going to read a story that is one of the most beloved stories in all of the Bible. And this is devoted to the moms, but it will speak to all of the men in here also, because that's just the way that God works. And He's not gender exclusive. He includes all of us. And so we're going to be doing a fair amount of reading so that you can get a good and wonderful perspective of this story. So let's begin in the first verse. It says, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." So a very challenging time. Whenever there is a famine, it's a dry or barren season, no fruit, no food. If there's no fruit in the fields, there's no food for the people. It also hurts the economy. It's very, very challenging on the economy, and so the men don't have work. And so this man took his family into the land of Moab. Now, Moab traditionally were rivals with the Hebrew people. They were a bordering nation, and so they had had conflict in their history. So not everything was smooth sailing between the Hebrew people and the Moabites. And so they had some distinct differences in the way that they worshiped, and their philosophies, their belief systems, their governmental structure. And so they were contrary one to another. But because work was to be found in the land of Moab, that's where this family went. It says the name of the man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab, and they remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. Very tragic situation. It doesn't tell us the cause of his passing away, other than he did pass away. So we don't want to speak where Scripture's not speaking. We don't want to just sermonize this. There's a significant loss. So not only has Naomi uprooted and she's away from her support system and all that's familiar, all that makes her feel at ease and comfortable, but now she's lost her provider. She's lost her husband. In the culture at that time, women were not the providers. The men were the primary providers. The women did not work within the framework of that particular people group. And so her husband, Elimelech, passed away and left her as a widow with 2 boys. It says in verse 3 then, in verse 4, now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so the women survived her 2 sons and her husband. And so now you have a household of just 3 women. And 2 of these women are not of Jewish descent. They're not Hebrews. And so they bring within the framework of this family, their own drama. And we know that every family has within it a framework of drama. And when we merge our families and we get married, the ceremony and the significance of the ceremony between the husband and wife is that 2 become one. And that's a true and a biblical truth. But there's also a lot of other dynamics that come in to the families. And so now Naomi has her 2 daughter-in-laws with her. And it says in verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return to the country of Moab, from the country of Moab. For as she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited His people by giving them bread. So the famine has now broke. And she heard about it. Rumor came across the border, and now she's going to head back home. Therefore, she went out from the place that she was, and her 2 daughter-in-laws with her, and they went on the way and returned to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they wept. And they said to her, "Surely we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands?" And then she expounded on that a little bit. It was the tradition of the Hebrew people that if there was the passing of a provider, that someone in the family was to come in and to make up that gap and to make up the difference. And since now all of the men, all of the providers are gone, Naomi is saying, even if I was to get married, even if I was to have children, are you going to wait till they're grown and then you're going to marry them? No. I mean, get on with your life. You stay here. You go back to your homes. I'm going back to my home. Let's just separate. It was a very, very trying and emotional time. And you can see there's a battle that's going on. Where do we belong? Where do we fit in? What do we believe? And all of these things are just intertwined in some very hard circumstances that these 3 ladies have experienced. And then in verse 16, "But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more so, if anything but death parts you and me." And when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. Now the 2 of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened, when they came to Bethlehem, that all the city was excited because of them. And the women of the city, this is what they said, "Is this Naomi? She had been gone over 10 years, and now she's returning home." So there's a welcoming party. They're looking forward to seeing her. And she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, but call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. And why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So it's harvest time. Now let me interject something here. Everything in the Bible is truly stated. Every word is truly stated. And this is Naomi's perspective at this time. She said these words. This was her interpretation of what had happened in her life, that from her view, potentially, the Lord was against her and not for her. And that's what pain can cause us to come to the conclusion of. Now, Scripture does not infer that, and it does not communicate that. But as people, at times, that's how we feel about life. In the midst of a battle, in the midst of a hard time, in the midst of a struggle, we can feel, what have I done to deserve this? What act did I do that this hardship has come upon me and upon my household? And there is silence at this portion of Scripture. There's no expounding, there's no defending, there's no explaining, because when people are hurting, people are hurting. And they need to have an avenue to express their pain and their hurt without feeling judged, criticized, or critiqued. Are you with me? And so there is silence right now at this portion. No one is interjecting. No one in the community is coming to Naomi saying, no, 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 you've got the story wrong. You've got the narrative wrong. Let me tell you how it really is. No one is interjecting. Everyone is supportive. Everyone is surrounding her. Everyone is glad to see her. And for the first time in a long time, she feels like she belongs. She's not in a foreign land anymore. She's not around people that are worshiping other gods. She's not in other cultures where their government is different. She has trekked back home, and she was willing to go alone. She was willing to make this journey all by herself, to abandon her two daughter-in-laws, who she said, out of her own mouth, have been very kind to her, very kind to her boys. They were good wives, but she just wanted them to have some quality of life. Move on with your life, and I'm moving on with mine. And she said, my name now is no longer Naomi. My name is Mara. And my life is bitter right now. My life is bitter. In chapter 2, we're going to pick up the story, and it says, there was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth and the Moabites said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. Then she left and went and gleaned in the fields after the reapers. And it happened, and she happened to come upon a part of the field that belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now, behold, Boaz was from Bethlehem, and said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. So here, the work environment is a faith-filled environment. And so Ruth says to her mother-in-law, she says, you know, we're back in this place, but we really don't have a means of income. So I will do this. I will just follow those that are in the barley field. And if they leave any morsel behind, if there's any grains that are left behind, if there's anything that's left in the field, I will gather the scraps, and that's what we'll survive on. That's how we're going to make it. You're brokenhearted, you're bitter, you're in a very challenging place, but I'm young enough and willing to go out, and I'm going to work in these fields, and I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to do my part to make sure that we have food in this house and that we are sustained. Now, the beautiful thing is that in the most challenging and difficult seasons in our life, when we're struggling to believe and we're struggling for a place to belong, God is working on the backside of our doubts and the backside of our struggles. There was a man that God had strategically placed and raised up to be a provider, a very wealthy and prominent man of godly character. These ladies were unaware. They had been out of the community for 10 years, unaware of the success that he had gained and that his business had flourished. And it wasn't just an accident that Ruth ended up in one of his fields following his workers. It was God's providential hand. It was God's goodness. It was God's mercy. It was God being good in the midst of something very tragic and bad going on. It was God still reaching out to help them when they were hurting. And He does that with all of us. I think one of the most challenging things for every mother, whatever level of mother you are, a grand or a great grand, which is a great level, there are times where if the Lord doesn't intervene into your life and help you because of your nurturing aspect, your heart would be shattered. And in the midst of what you face as a mother, God is on the backside working, and you don't even know it. He has always got someone working so that people get the story right. Right now, the story's not that pretty. It's a hard story, a challenging place, quite a battle. A tough, tough battle that they're in. But they're not alone. They may feel like they're alone. It may seem like they're alone, but they're not alone. God is with them, and God is fighting for them. It said in verse 5, then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, it is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little in the house. Then Boaz said to Ruth, you will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. So she fell down on her face and bowed to the ground, and she said, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? And Boaz answered and said to her, it has been fully reported to me, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and have come to the people whom you did not know before. Your testimony matters. People know us by reputation. People know us. And it says, this wealthy man who is a prominent businessman in the community is looking at this Gentile young lady whose people have been hostile towards his people, and he says, your reputation has preceded you. I mean, she's bewildered. She is overwhelmed that anyone would even pay attention to her. She wanted to go about what she was doing very quietly. We'd say stealth mode. I mean, she lost her dignity. And she was just wanting to go around and just a few crumbs for today. That would do. But Boaz, what a guy he was. Not only did he, bless his workers and bring the Lord's blessing into their life, he noticed those that were on the peripheral or on the edges, and he made them feel like they belonged. There's a lot of people that are marginalized in our world today, and they feel like they're an enemy. They're not an ally. They've stood against everything that maybe we as Christians have upheld and honored. How are we going to treat them? What if their reputation is honorable? What if they have a good testimony? What if they have good character qualities, even though they come from a different background and come from a different place? How are we going to treat them? Are we going to be open and receptive? Are we going to be people that reach out compassionately to those that are marginalized, to those that are on the peripheral, on the edges, and just trying to eke out a living? We have a lot that's been given unto us in many different arenas. And with what we've been giving, we're responsible to give it back to people. And what Boaz did is such a good example to us that we are blessed to be a blessing. And he said, listen, I don't want you just going around just picking up some crumbs. I want you eating with my crew, and I want you gleaning from the fields and getting the best of the harvest. You're now an employee. I just hired you. You belong here. Her humility and her kindness, which is a demonstration of her faith and her godly character, opened up a door. Remember what she said to Naomi? Where you go, I go. Where you lodge, I lodge. Your God's going to be my God. She had been around false gods enough and seen all of the phony baloney. And said, all of those gods that I grew up around as a Moabite, they didn't produce anything. They didn't produce anything. So I'm going where you're going, and I'm going to a land where your God is God, and I've heard about your God. And I've heard about all the great things your God has done. That's good stuff, isn't it? I should at least get a holy grunt. That would be good. Let's look down at verse 17 in chapter 2. So she gleaned in the field until evening and beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Then she took it up and went into the city. And her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought it back and gave it to her, what she kept back after she had been satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you." So she took her mother-in-law with her, whom she had worked, and she said, "The man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz." Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness in the living and the dead." And Naomi said to her, "This man is a relative of ours, one of our close relatives." And Ruth the Moabite said, "He also said to me, 'You shall stay close to my young men until they have finished all of my harvest.'" And Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with this with his young women, and that people do not meet you in any other field," because there was danger there. And she stayed close to the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law. And so God had provided redemption is starting to come back into this family. Redeem means that things are being returned. Things are being returned into their rightful place. When we start getting our beliefs right and we start getting back to where we belong, it's amazing how things start to turn. I think all of us at times have just, hit a dry place or a place of famine in our life, and then we just resolve to go somewhere and do something, just to eke out a living, but it's not where we really belong. And at times it affects what we really believe and who we really are as people. But God in His goodness is always working on the backside of our lives. And He's working in this story also. And He's working in yours. And in chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, it says, "Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore wash yourself and anoint yourself. Put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the men until he's finished eating and drinking. And then it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do.' And she said to her, 'All that you say to me, I will do.'" Now, this is where the men went at the end of the working day, and we would say that it's where they're seeing what the profit of the day is, the threshing floor, and they're beating out the wheat or the barley, and they're measuring out and they're weighing it, and it's where they had their dinner. It's where they many times slept, because they didn't want people to come in and rob the harvest and take the harvest, and so they stationed themselves there during harvest season so the harvest would not be lost. And women rarely, if ever, went to this particular place. And the counsel here is very interesting counsel, because once again there's some custom and some culture and some history that we have to know the background of a little bit to appreciate the story here. And that is that women were not welcome unless there was an invitation extended into this particular place. And so she had to go, and she assumed a place. She assumed a place once that Boaz had eaten his dinner and was done with the evening's activities. He laid down to sleep. And something very interesting happens is that Ruth comes in and she positions herself at his feet. And she covers herself, and Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night. And there's Ruth at his feet. And he freaks out. There's no other way to say it. I mean, he's like, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here?" And she explains why she's there. And it overwhelms him. She is showing him honor and respect, which, ladies, this is just a little caveat. That's your husband's number one need. And husbands, your wife's number one need is security. And Boaz was providing Ruth and Naomi with security. And she was reciprocating, and she was showing, Ruth was showing Boaz honor and respect. So this is like a relationship that's being formed. What she's saying is, you didn't have to do anything for me. You didn't have to treat me well. You didn't have to protect me. You didn't have to look out for me. You didn't even have to recognize me. But you did. So, down south, we would say, she went back home that night with lots of food, and her mother-in-law said to her, I think something's happening here. We'd say this is matchmaking 101. Something's happening here. So, sis, you go get all dolled up. You put on your nicest dress. You put on the nice perfume. And you wait. Just don't go barging in there. Don't be loud. Don't be boisterous. Don't be rude. Don't be improper. You just go in there quietly and you sit at his feet and see what happens. You know, a quiet and a meek spirit, that's a precious thing in the sight of the Lord. And she sat at his feet, and it got his attention. We would say down south, she put her hat on and was tipping her hat. What that means was that she was ready for a new relationship. That the days of grieving, the days of sorrow, the days of bitterness were behind, and a new day was beginning. The battle is being fought by the Lord. Now, Ruth is doing her part, Naomi's doing her part, but God is narrating the story. God's putting all of the people in the right places. He's a master at doing this. When it just does, it looks like the enemy has us in checkmate. God says, no, there's another move. There's another move. There's another move. And as long as you keep moving with God, you're going to come out because the battle is the Lord's. And they had to keep believing, and they had to stay where they belonged, and God kept working. And God's working in this house today also. It says in verse 10, it says, this is Boaz's response. Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after the young men, whether poor or rich. I mean, you weren't, just going after some Johnny-come-lately. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there's a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. Lie down and get a good night's sleep. Lie down and rest. Now, this is the way it worked back then, is that Boaz was not the first in line to take care of Ruth and Naomi. There was another one, another relative that was higher up, one that preceded him. And so here, the next day, Boaz gets up early in the morning, and he goes to the gate of the city. And this is where people gathered and had discussions. And the relative came by who was first in line to be the redeemer of Ruth and Naomi. In other words, to claim their land and their inheritance of Elimelech and Ruth and Orpah's husbands. And so, while they're at the gate, Boaz says, hey, would you come here? I need to talk to you about a few things. And he lays out the scenario. You know that Naomi and Ruth are back, and you know the situation that brought them back here. Now, it's your responsibility, if you're willing, to redeem their inheritance. And if not, I'll do it. He says, but remember, if you redeem their inheritance, it's not just the land that you get It's not just the property on the land that you get. You also have to take care of Ruth and marry her and provide children so that the family legacy and the line of that family goes on. Now, these are very important truths, and all of this story is leading us to some very important points. So I want you to stay with me. This guy said to Boaz, not going to do it then. You do it. You do it, because I'm not willing to take on that kind of responsibility. I'd love to have the land. I'd love to have the property. I'd love to have, in other words, the assets, but I don't want the liabilities. These women are liabilities. I've got enough responsibility, enough problems in my life. I don't need to take on 2 women, especially 2 widows. I don't need that. And so Boaz says, hey, you got it. And everyone around the city gate was the witness. And they all said, and God be our witness. This is the way this thing is going to roll out. And so we're going to go now to chapter 4, and we're going to finish by reading verse 13 through 22. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went to her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nurturer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons has borne him. And then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom, and she became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they shall call his name Obed, and he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Amminadab, and Amminadab begot Nahshon, Nahshon begot Salmon, Salmon begot Boaz, and Boaz begot Obed, Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. Okay, so here's the end of the story. Is that Ruth, a Moabite, Gentile woman, not even in a covenant with God, not even within the lineage of a covenant with God, ends up getting grafted in and becomes the great-grandmother of King David. And from King David came Jesus Christ. And Naomi's life and the interpretation that God must have been against her changed, and her latter days were greater than her former days. God took care of the story himself because the battle was his. The Lord helped Naomi to see, my hand was never against you. I didn't cause the death of your husband, but I want your life to go forward. And he made a way through a redeemer, through a kinsman redeemer, a family redeemer, to bring everything back together. So here are the things that I want you to know about this story that are very important with our subject matter. In the battle to believe and belong, we have opportunities, all of us, to be bitter. So be slow to coming to conclusions. The rest of the story has yet to unfold. It's so easy when the narrative doesn't go our way and when the story doesn't unfold the way that we want to, that we come to conclusions too quickly. Your life isn't done. The rest of the story is yet to unfold. Don't come to improper conclusions. In the battle to believe and belong, we're going to have opportunities to go back. Some people are going to tell us, just go back. It's not worth it. But God, in His wisdom, shows us a young lady that pressed forward. She didn't allow the convenience of what was familiar to pressure her to draw back. And that's what we instinctively want to do as people when things don't go our way. In the battle to believe and belong, our character will be tested. So be willing and obedient, humble and kind, and God will bless what you put your hand to. I guess the gals could have come back to town and had an entitlement mentality, but they didn't. Ruth said, I'll go to work. I know it's a very humble occupation, but I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to do anything to help you. In the battle to believe and belong, there are always those who play significant roles in our lives to bless us and to provide for us. Let them do so. And when the battle has come to an end, and all battles come to an end, and you go through the battle correctly by holding on to your faith and staying where you belong, close to the heart of God, then your name is associated with the character of Jesus Christ. When people think of you, they think of someone who is a Christian and who behaved like a Christian. So the battle to believe, in spite of our personal loss and pain, and the battle to belong, where we are loved and celebrated, is worth fighting. It's worth getting involved in. For the battle is the Lord's, and the victory is ours in Christ Jesus.
Thank you for watching today's message. If you'd like to know more about today's message or the ministry here at Living Word Fellowship in Knoxville, Iowa, please call 641-828-7119 or visit us online at lwfknoxville.com. If you are in the Knoxville, Iowa area, please stop by and see us on Sundays at 10 a.m. or Wednesdays at 7 p.m. at 321 East Robinson, where there's always something for everyone.